My name is Ashley Carmichael. I am 21, and I found out what my parents really thought of me from a recovery room at St. Tapelsis, David's in Austin, with a transfusion line still running into my left arm. 7 weeks earlier, I had given birth to my daughter Ren. Then on a Thursday afternoon, my obstetrician called me at 3 p.m. and told me to come in immediately. My postpartum blood work had come back wrong, and the bleeding I had been quietly managing for 3 weeks was not normal. By 6 that evening, I was being wheeled into an emergency D&C. By 8, I was waking up with 2 units of someone else's blood moving through my veins and a husband on speakerphone 600 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Someone had to take care of my 7-week-old daughter that night. My parents lived 40 minutes south, in San Marcos. My father said no. He told my husband Brennan one sentence. And that sentence is the reason you're here. Your brother needs us more. He has real responsibilities. My brother was a 34-year-old man named Dustin who had filed for the 3rd bankruptcy of his career in May. My father was a 64-year-old retired electrician who had told his sister at Easter that he and my mother were getting by on Social Security and Ashley's little help. What I did from that hospital bed in the next 4 minutes ended 7 years and $420,000. And that is not even the part that broke them. The part that broke them walked through the door 3 hours later. An 87-year-old man in a flannel shirt and a Stetson, carrying a worn leather binder. And he said something none of them ever expected to hear out loud. Welcome to Quiet Reckoning, the channel where dependable people finally close the account. If someone in your life has ever treated your steadiness as a renewable resource, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me the name of the person you would actually call from a hospital bed. And subscribe. The part with my grandfather is the part you will remember. I want to tell you about the phone call because that is where it starts. I had come out of the anesthesia about 40 minutes earlier. The first thing I felt was the cold ache where the IV had been moved to my left hand, and the warmth of the transfusion bag they had hung above the bed. A nurse named Marisol was checking the 2nd unit of blood. Her name tag had 2 small stickers on it, one of a tiny taco and one of a UT Longhorn. Brennan was on speaker on the pillow beside my head, and his voice was doing that flat, careful thing it does when he is scared and trying not to sound scared. Ash, the neighbor can stay until 10. I called your dad. I knew before he said it. He won't come. There was a pause. And behind the pause, his words. I could hear it faint and unmistakable. The PA system of a helicopter staging deck, the distant whine of rotors, a Louisiana voice over a radio calling out a launch number. My husband was at least 9 hours from a runway in New Orleans and at least 14 from our front door. He said your brother needs them this weekend. Brennan said, Dustin is moving out of the storage unit into a new place. He needs help with the truck. A storage unit. My 7-week-old daughter needed someone for the night. My father had been told his daughter was in a recovery bay with a transfusion line and a husband on an oil rig. And the answer was a U-Haul. I did not cry. I want you to understand that part. Because everyone expects the woman in the recovery bay to fall apart. And I did not. I looked at the band on my left wrist. Then I reached over with my right hand and pulled my phone off the rolling tray table. I had a great deal to take care of. And I was very good at taking care of things. That had always been the problem. You should know who I was before that night. Because it explains why my family treated me the way a thermostat treats a room. I grew up in a 1-story rental in Round Rock, Texas, where the AC worked when it felt like it. My father, Roy Sanderson, was a journeyman electrician for the city of San Marcos. My mother, Vivian, was a secretary at the Hays County Courthouse. My older brother Dustin was the planned one, the loud one, the one for whom my mother kept a baby book and a binder of his Little League photos. I was the surprise, Born 4 years later, in a year when my father had been on workers' comp for a fall off a ladder. I paid for community college by working second shift at a taco cabana on Anderson Lane. I transferred on scholarship to the University of Texas at Austin and clawed my way into a marketing program nobody in my family understood. By 28, I was the director of brand strategy at a software company off Mopac, the person they put in the room when the launch could not slip. I read consumer data for a living. Numbers do not have favorites. And they do not lie to your face. Which is more than I could say for some people. Brennan and I married at 26 and decided to wait on kids partly because we wanted to and partly because there was always something the family needed first. We lived below our means in a quiet way nobody noticed. 2 incomes. Unused Subaru. No debt. That is the only reason what I am about to tell you was even possible. For 7 years, I had been sending my parents $5,000 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to my husband. Not to my brother. Not to a soul. I told myself it was for my father's stroke recovery and the prescriptions Medicare did not cover. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it, and being the steady one had become its own kind of identity. I am telling you this now so you understand. I was not naive. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure. There is a difference. And that Thursday night, in a recovery bay at St. Tamplevennis, David's, I finally learned what it was. The first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem. Because that is what I do. With my right thumb. I pulled up the number for a licensed overnight care agency Brennan and I had vetted before Ren was born and never ended up using. A woman named Imani answered on the second ring. I told her my name, my situation, and my address in 8 sentences. Calm as a Tuesday. I need a night caregiver for a 7-week-old girl. Starting now. Possibly 2 nights. Healthy baby. Father is on a helicopter from a Gulf rig. I am the patient. The house is unlocked. Code 6483. Bottles in the warmer. She asked if the baby was medically stable. She is perfect. I am the one in the hospital. 45 minutes later. A caregiver named Solana let herself into my house with the code. Washed her hands at the kitchen sink. And texted me a photograph of Ren asleep in her bassinet with one fist against her cheek and the soft cotton blanket Grandma Mavis had quilted before she died, folded under her chin. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Marisol, my nurse, watched me set the phone down and asked gently if I had family who could come. It's handled, I said. Next. Marisol blinked. People always blink when you do not perform the breakdown they are braced for. I was not being cold. I was triaging the way you do when you have spent your whole life being the only adult in a room full of adults. My daughter was safe and warm and watched. My husband was on a helicopter. My body would knit. The transfusion was running. There was exactly 1 item left on the list that night. One I had carried for 7 years and never once allowed myself to touch. And now my right hand was free. And my mind was very, very clear. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed in the dim bay like a small, cold moon. Inside the app, on the 3rd screen down, there is a section called Scheduled Transfers. And I had 4 of them. I knew them by heart the way you know a scar. The first was labeled Mom and Dad Household $2. Ling ling ling. The second said Dad Recovery $1. Lambe. The third said Family Support $1. Ling ling ling. The fourth, the one I had set up 3 years ago and never named clearly, said only Dustin Bridge $800. $5,000 on the 1st of every month. For 84 months. I had set the first one up at 24 years old. The night my father called me sobbing from a hospital room in San Marcos after his second thanks in advance. He had been frightened. He had asked if I could help. Just for a year. until the supplemental insurance kicked in. I had said yes. I had not let myself add up the total since. The total had felt like a door I could not walk back through. So I made myself look. The app did the math without flinching. $420,000. Almost $500,000. Gone out of my life. One quiet automated transfer at a time. While my father told his sister at Easter that Vivian and I are getting by on Social Security and Ashley's little help, I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A pale green check mark appeared. And a single line of text I will remember until I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed cancel on the second. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps. Maybe 19 seconds. And 7 years simply stopped. The way a faucet stops when you turn the handle all the way to the right. I felt no triumph. I felt no grief. I felt a strange flat clarity. The way a launch dashboard feels when the conversion rate finally locks in. Then, as I was about to close the app, my eyes caught on something in the transaction history I had never bothered to scroll into before. All line item. 14 months back. Buried under the dad recovery label. It read, lump payment D $32. Ling ling ling. My brother's initial. Not my father's recovery. Dustin. I locked the phone screen and laid it on the blanket. The transfusion bag pulsed slowly above my head. Marisol came in to swap something out and saw my face and asked if I was in pain. Not the kind you can fix. I told her. And I tried to smile so she would not flag it. After she left, I lay in the dim bay listening to the monitor, count my heartbeats. And I made myself sit with the question I had been avoiding for 7 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer, the one strangers offer in comment sections, is that I was a pushover. Desperate for parental love. That answer is wrong. And if you have ever been the dependable one, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way I had decided that being needed was the same as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, no one could remove me from the building. I was buying my position one direct deposit at a time. My grandmother understood that about me before I did. Her name was Mavis Sanderson, my father's mother. Not my mother's a small, sun-leathered woman who smelled like coffee and Vicks and lemon furniture polish, and who had not once raised her voice in the 83 years she had been on this earth. Mavis grew up on a peach farm outside Fredericksburg and taught 4th grade at a public school in San Marcos for 36 years. She had lived in a small white frame house on Mitchell Street with my grandfather Howard since 1974, the summer before my wedding. When I was 25, she took me out to her side porch one Saturday morning and handed me a glass of unsweet tea and said, "Ashy, somebody is going to have to watch the money in this family. And your daddy won't, and your mama can't. So, it'll have to be you." I had thought she meant be generous. I think now, lying in that recovery bay with the bank app still open under my thumb, that she had meant something much more specific. She had meant, don't let your daddy drain you. Child, don't let your brother either. My grandmother Mavis had passed in March of last year. 14 months ago. On a Tuesday morning in her own bed, Howard had called me himself at 6 a.m. His voice steady, and said only, "Mavis is gone. I made the calls. Don't drive up in the dark. The roads are wet." That had been Howard's whole way of moving through the world. Make the calls. Don't drive in the dark. I had been too pregnant and too busy with a product launch at work to ask Howard what Mavis had left him or how he was managing. I had assumed my parents had handled it the way I had assumed my money was buying my father's prescriptions. I had spent a lifetime assuming the best about people who had never once earned that assumption. And I had called that assumption family. Lying in that recovery bay with my daughter 40 miles away in a stranger's careful arms, I finally understood that I had been funding a story about my family. Not the actual family. The actual family had chosen a U-Haul. Brennan called back from the helipad at Lake Charles about an hour later. And this time he told me everything my father had said. Word for word. Because he knew I would want it that way. He had called him at 6:50 p.m. He had explained that I was in surgery for postpartum hemorrhage, that I was getting 2 units of blood, that Ren needed someone overnight. He had asked Roy please drive the 40 minutes from San Marcos to our house in Westlake and stay until he could get home Saturday morning. My father had sighed his long theatrical sigh, the one he had used since I was 9 years old to signal that you had asked for too much. Brennan, your brother-in-law is moving this weekend. We promised Dustin we'd help with the truck. He has real responsibilities. He's got a new lease starting Monday. The storage company is charging late fees. We can't leave him in the lurch. What Dustin's real responsibilities were, exactly, was a question I had stopped asking myself in 2019. Besides, my father had said, Ashley always lands on her feet. She is so resourceful. And then he had said the line, the one Brennan repeated to me in a voice so careful I could hear the muscles in his jaw locking. Your brother-in-law never has these emergencies. As if the hemorrhage that had been quietly soaking through my pads for 3 weeks had checked my family rank first. As if my daughter's first night without her mother was negotiable because Dustin had a deposit on a duplex in Buda. As if Brennan's existence on a Gulf rig were a logistical preference rather than the reason we owned a house in Westlake. Ashley, Brennan said softly, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I am not there. It's not on you. I said, come home safely. Reimagined. I hung up. I lay in the dim bay with the bank app still glowing on the locked screen. And I waited. I knew my father. He would discover the canceled transfers on the 1st of the month, when no deposit landed, and he would call me. And his voice would be gruff but small, the way it always was when he wanted something. I had 11 days to be ready. I would be ready. What I did not know, what I could not have known, at 9:06 p.m. On that Thursday night in that recovery bay at St. Primon, David's, was that my grandfather Howard had been at his kitchen table on Mitchell Street in San Marcos since 6 o'clock, eating a bowl of pinto beans and cornbread, Mavis's recipe, when his phone rang at 7:40 with my mother on the other end. He had taken the call standing at the screen door, looking out at the small fenced backyard where Mavis had grown her tomatoes. He had listened in silence for 2 minutes while my mother explained, in her careful charity voice, that Ashley had gotten herself into another situation, and would Howard please consider driving up to Austin to sit with the baby for a night or two. Howard had asked one question. Did Roy say no first? Vivian, my mother had paused. Then she had told the truth. Because she could not lie to Howard. He had a previous commitment to your grandson. Howard had said, all right, Vivian, and he had hung up. Howard had then sat at his kitchen table for about 10 minutes. He had looked at the framed photograph of Mavis on the windowsill, the one of her at the peach orchard in 1968, before he ever met her. He had thought about what Mavis had said to him in February, the week before she died, when the hospice nurse had stepped out of the room and the morphine had not yet pulled her under. He had thought about a leather binder in a small fireproof safe in his bedroom closet. A binder he had not opened in 14 months. And then Howard had stood up. Slowly, because of his right knee. And he had gone to his bedroom. And he had put on a clean snap-button shirt and the Stetson he had bought at Cavender's in 1981. And he had taken the binder out of the safe. And he had gotten into the 2014 Ford F-150 he had bought used from a coworker and never gotten rid of. And he had driven 41 minutes up I-35 to St. Renazade. David's in Austin to find his granddaughter. He arrived at the front desk of the surgical recovery floor at exactly 11:19 p.m. and asked the night clerk where to find Ashley Carmichael. The clerk asked if he was family. Howard looked at her over his bifocals. The way an old Texan looks at a young person who is trying to do her job. And he said gently, "I'm what's left of it." Howard walked through the door of my recovery bay at 11:21 p.m. with the leather binder under his left arm and his Stetson in his right hand. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I was okay. He pulled the visitor chair to the side of the bed, sat the binder on his lap, set the Stetson on the binder, and put his big calloused hand over my right hand. "Ashy," he said. "Where's the baby?" I told him about Solana. I showed him the photograph the agency had texted. Howard looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Your daddy called me when he heard," Howard said. "Roy called me at 6:30. He said you were in trouble, and Brennan was offshore. He asked me if I'd drive up and check on the baby. Then your mama got on the line and said no. That was not necessary. That they would handle it. So I sat home and ate my beans. I figured Vivian meant what she said." He paused. Then Vivian called me back at 7:40 and asked if I'd go after all, and I knew. I asked him what he knew. Howard said, "I knew Roy had already told someone no first, and I knew it was probably you." He did not open the binder that night. He sat with me until 12:45, and we did not talk about money or my brother or my father. He told me about a recipe Mavis had been making him chicken and dumplings that used a leftover rotisserie bird from HEB that Mavis had asked him to teach me before she died. And he had not yet done it. "I'll make it for you when you come home," Howard said. "You and Wren and Brennan. You come for Sunday supper when those stitches let you sit at a table." I let him talk. The sound of his voice, that slow hill country vowels, the careful, unhurried sentences, was the first thing in 12 hours that had reminded me I was a person with a history, not a hospital chart. At 12:45, Howard stood up, kissed the top of my head, and told me he would be back in the morning. After he had stopped at the house to look in on Wren and Solana, "I'll leave the binder with the nurse," he said. "You do not need to open it tonight. You need to sleep." He gave the binder to Marisol at the nurse's station and asked her to bring it back to me in the morning. After I had eaten, Marisol, who had seen many old men carry many binders into many hospital rooms in her career, simply said, "Yes, sir," and put the binder behind the desk. I slept 4 hours, which was more than I had slept in any 24-hour period since Wren had been born. I want to skip forward, because the next 2 weeks are where the real work happened. And most of it happened on a laptop on a hospital tray table, and then, later, on the couch, in my own living room in Westlake, with a heating pad on my abdomen and Wren asleep on a boppy pillow against my left thigh. The morning after Howard's visit, I asked Brennan's older sister Imani, who is a forensic accountant for a mid-size firm in Dallas and is exactly the kind of person you want on your side when you discover several $100,000 have quietly gone somewhere they should not have to drive down to Austin for the weekend. Imani arrived at our house Saturday at 11:09 a.m. with an overnight bag, a French press, and a small portable printer she had bought specifically for this trip from a Best Buy in Round Rock. "You and I are going to do some bookkeeping," she told me. We did. While Solana fed Wren and rocked her on the front porch in the soft Texas autumn sun, Imani and I logged into my bank, exported 84 months of statements, and dropped them into a pivot table. This is what I do for a tech company off Mopac. I can certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $420,000 by where it had actually landed. I filtered by date, payee, withdrawal location, and category code. I cross-referenced every transfer with the corresponding withdrawal on my parents' account, which I had access to as a cosigner on their checking, a cosigner status my mother had added me to in 2018 when she had needed help disputing a fraudulent charge and had simply forgotten to remove me afterward. The picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was not the picture my father had painted at his sister's Easter table for the last 7 years. The medical recovery I thought I was supplementing my father's thanks in advance medication. The cardiologist follow-ups. The gap between Medicare and the supplement came to about $48,000 across the whole period. The mortgage I had believed I was helping with had been paid off in 2019, and the house had been refinanced at 4% that same year. The $11,000 I had been wiring annually for the mortgage gap had no mortgage to gap to. So, where had the other $348,000 gone? I filtered by withdrawal location, and 2 clusters lit up on the map like a rash. The first cluster ran to my brother. Steady. Deliberate. Almost monthly. Bank transfers. Written checks. Even a wire one Sunday in 2022 for $15,000 in a single line marked Dad Specialist out of network. I cross-checked that wire with my father's medical records, which I had access to as his designated next of kin from the 2018 episode. There had been no specialist visit that week. The $15,000 had funded my brother Dustin's 3rd attempt at a vape shop in San Marcos, which had folded in 8 months. In total, across 7 years, $185,000 had been funneled to my brother. The second cluster was the one that stopped me. ATM withdrawals, 347 of them, in amounts of $200 or $400 at a time. Almost all of them within a 1-mile radius of 2 specific locations. The first location was an off-track betting parlor on Manor Road in East Austin, 23 minutes from my parents' driveway. The second was a convenience store on Old Bastrop Highway in San Marcos that had a kiosk in the back, which my mother's cousin Eileen would later confirm was used for online sports betting deposits. I cross-referenced the withdrawal dates with public sports schedules. NCAA football, Saturdays. NFL Sundays. NBA playoffs. The Kentucky Derby. The Belmont. Every withdrawal lined up with a game day. Imani. I said, I think my father has been gambling. Imani looked at the map. Then she looked at me. Ashley, your father has not been gambling. Your father has had a gambling problem since at least 2018. The pattern is too clean. The amounts are too consistent. The locations are too repetitive. This is a man on a schedule. The total to my father's betting activity was approximately $163,000 across 7 years. The total to Dustin's failed businesses was $185,000 and a day. The total that had legitimately gone to my parents' household needs and my father's medical care was about $72,000 becomes. $420,000 minus 72 equaled $348,000 in misappropriation. I had financed my father's sportsbook habit and my brother's bankruptcies for 7 years. While my father told my Aunt Beverly at Easter that Vivian and I are getting by on Social Security and Ashley's little help. Little help, $348,000 of little help. I printed the summary to a single page on Imani's portable printer. 1 clean sheet. 12 rows. 84 months of evidence. Then Brennan came back from the hardware store with a quart of milk and an extension cord and showed me one more thing. He had been scrolling the Sanderson relatives chat, a group text my Aunt Beverly had set up in 2020, and he had screenshotted a message my father had sent 6 weeks before any of this. In response to my mother announcing that Ren had been born. We are so blessed. Ashley and Brennan are doing well. Vivian and I have been blessed in our retirement. The Lord has provided. The Lord. I looked at that message. And I looked at my one printed page. And something in me went very quiet and very level. I was not going to send an angry text. I was not going to explain or defend. I was going to let the paper into the room. In front of the same audience my father had spent 7 years performing for. And then I was going to walk out and never fund the show again. It's handled, I said to Brennan. And for the first time, the words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. My father discovered the canceled transfers the way he discovered everything that cost him something late and at maximum volume. First of the month came Slash and Weir and Aralia Manichin. No deposit landed. Bitin a. M. His name was on my phone screen. I let it go to voicemail twice. The third time I answered, because avoidance was the old me, and the new me had a healing incision and a spreadsheet. His voice came through gruff but small. The voice he used when he wanted something but did not want to admit it. Ashy. Hey there. Sweetheart. How are you feeling? Your mama and I have been worried sick about you and that baby girl. Worried sick. The man who chose a U-Haul. I told him I was recovering. The incision was healing. The hemoglobin was back up. Brennan was home. Ren was gaining weight. Well, that's good. That's real good. There was a pause while he repositioned. Ashy. I noticed the deposit didn't hit this morning. I figure that's just a mix-up with your bank. With everything going on. But I wanted to give you a holler in case you needed to know. I told him it was not a mix-up. Silence. Then the guilt. Right on schedule. In his version. Ashley Lynn. After everything your mama and I did for you, after we raised you, after we worked our tails off to keep a roof over your head, after your daddy paid for the rec center t-ball when you were 9, we have given you everything we had. Ashy. And now your old man is sick. And you are pulling the rug out from under us. I let him run. He circled back. The way he always did. To the one weapon that had never failed him. And he said it again. Lower now. Almost wounded. As if I were the one being unreasonable. Ashy, your brother never has these emergencies. And there it was. The third time I had heard that sentence in 12 days.